Well, here I am back again. There are some people who will be glad, there are others who will be sad. Nobody is liked by everybody. Sometimes I make points to try to make a point. And when you are trying to get some things done, you're very sincere about it. You're full of enthusiasm and you believe in what you're doing. Somebody might pour cold water on it and you let it go. But remember this, first of all, I will have kids come to me when I was in the legislature and ask, what can I tell them that will help them to succeed? I say, well, I don't know. The main thing I tell you, the first thing, you have to believe in yourself, trust your own judgment, and use your mind. A loaded brain beats a loaded gun. Then I'll use myself as an example. If I was a gang banger or carried two pistols, the police would love that because it would put them in a position to erase me, just like that. When you use your mind and you outthink them, you outsmart them, you outmaneuver them, you are a bigger threat than the gangbanger. First of all, the so-called gangbangers are so stupid that they're going to do things to their own people. And they're cunning enough to know that if they restrict what they do to Black people, the cops don't care. They're doing the enemy's dirty work. There's an expression, a saying, my friend's friend is my friend. My enemy's enemy is my friend, because we both are looking at the same person or group and know what they are about. So there's no need in thinking that just because you have a good idea, that you're honest and sincere, that everybody's going to support you. You all have heard of Jesus, even if you don't practice some of the things he preached. But Jesus was not a nammy-pammy person. You all know what the initials SOB stand for. Well, Jesus used the equivalent when some people came around and he knew they were up to no good, and they were always religious people, the scribes, the Pharisees, the publicans, all of those who had a religious connection were the greatest enemies that Jesus had. There were leeches and hangers-on who would come around looking for a free meal. But Jesus referred to people as, you are of your father, the devil. Well, why do white people get so upset when Elijah Muhammad said about them what Jesus said? They are upset because Elijah put blue-eyed in front of that word devil as a modifier. And that meant these people who are called white. What is a white person? Other people have a nationality. They'll say German, Italian, Swiss, whatever. But then there's the general category of white that includes everybody who's not Black. And they are not always united. The biggest, bloodiest wars that have occurred have been white people against white people. They like to tell us we can't get along. They're the ones who can't get along. When there was a war involving Germany and the Axis powers, I'll tell you one of them, and you have to guess the other one for yourself. Hitler, Mussolini, that was the Germans over here and the Italians over there. People condemn Hitler, but what about the Italians who were right there with Hitler, trying to help him succeed, and whatever benefits could be obtained, they obtained them. A mistake that's made, however, is to look at somebody's nationality. That has to do with nation, not bloodline. Being born in Germany made you a German. but you might be of Italian vintage or Polish or whatever. So when it comes to nationality, they will fight each other harder than cats against dogs. We make the mistake of letting white people tell us we can't get along, that we can't work with each other. They're master psychologists, they're master deceivers. And when those people came around Jesus, he called them sons of vipers. Well, a female dog is a bitch. And that's a term that's actually used when they're talking about dogs and their lineage. So you know what an SOB is. Well, Jesus called those people SOVs, the letter V, you sons of vipers, or a son of a bee. And he knew that the louder the vipers hissed, the closer and more effective he was in striking near their nest. Call them children of the devil. You're of your father, the devil. And some of them would respond because of the shadowiness and questions about his birth. See, Joseph and Mary were not really married when Jesus was born, based on what people said. And you know what these people who didn't like Jesus said? At least we know who our father is. They were saying Jesus was a bastard, that he didn't know who his daddy was, and that Mary may not have ever told him. So many things are in that book that you don't hear when you go to these churches because the preachers are ignorant. They don't read. They make a lot of noise. They say things that will make you whoop and holler and shout. But when you get through, you're poorer than you were when you went there because they're always going to squeeze some money out of you, no matter how poor you are. I have yet to go to a church. And when I was younger, I was reared in a holiness church called the Church of God in Christ. I never saw anybody who was taking up the offering tell a person, brother or sister, I know you work hard for your money, that every nickel is of importance to you, so you don't have to put anything in this offering plate. You do yours when you take care of your family. No, they'll squeeze the last nickel out of those poor people. Most of these Black churches have a lot of poor people. They are relying on Black women. They're the backbones of these worthless churches. You might have more churches than you have taverns. And it's interesting that the churches and the taverns both deal in spirits. Churches call it the Holy Spirit. Taverns call their whiskey spirits. But the holy people go away from their church and their spirits down to the tavern and partake of the devil's spirits. You cannot go by the label or the title or the profession that a person makes. There are people who, if I were not as savvy as I am, would cut the ground from underneath. They grin in my face and they think I don't know what's behind that grin. They are people who smile only from the teeth out. There are people whose relatives are going to trade on the fact that one of their relatives and I might get along, and they think they can misuse me and ride that relative's coattails. I never say all that I know. I know more than what I say. And about Jesus, you know what was said? He had no need that anybody testify to him of man, for he knew what was in man. He knew. I know. Anybody can know who pays attention. One reason when I was in the legislature, was the most feared because of my knowledge, my ability, and the most hated because they couldn't give me anything to take me away from doing what I believed, from saying what I thought ought to be said and needed to be said. There are people in the legislature who will contact me and say things are not the same because without you there, there's a big hole and nobody will fill it. Well, you probably are thinking of the first thing that occurred to me. Since you see the hole, why don't you fill it? Well, they're the kind of people who know what needs to be done. They're aware of people who do it, but they say, I'm not the one who's going to do it. So those of you who are genuinely interested in our community and its uplift, don't be disheartened when people that you thought were one thing and they turn out to be treacherous. There are a lot of people who know of me, but I don't think anybody knows me. I don't let people get close to me. I don't share secrets with them. I'm not trustful toward people because I can see how they betray others. And it wouldn't be any different with me. Now, that's not the thing I had intended to talk about mainly, but it's a segue. That means it leads right to something else. I filed complaints against judges. I've gotten judges kicked off the bench. I've gotten some of them disciplined by being reprimanded or even suspended. Like when a judge used the N-word, he was suspended for 6 months without pay, and he had to take one of these human relations courses. Other people sat in the courtroom and heard it and said nothing. I wasn't in the courtroom. Then how did I find out about it? A white woman was irate. And guess who she thought of right away? Correct. And she made the right decision. Because when she told me what had happened in court, I got a transcript. I don't just run off with what people tell me. They mean well, but sometimes they don't really hear what is said or they misconstrue it. But when the words are written in the transcript, nobody can stop me. And I went right after that judge. There wound up being a public hearing. He should have been kicked off the bench, but he wasn't. There was another judge who was misusing female employees. And once again, people knew about it, but they wouldn't do anything. But this one female lawyer knew that I wouldn't tolerate those kind of things. Believe it or not, I believe in a court system when it does what it should do. There are 3 branches of government in America. The executive, which at the federal level would be the president and his cabinet and all of that. The judiciary, which would be the Supreme Court. The Congress. So the Congress passes laws. The Supreme Court interprets laws and says what those laws mean and will strike them down. Then the executive, who carries out the law. At the state level, the executive would be the governor and all the people in that department, such as the attorney general, and the statute will name all those people. But the ones who carry out the law are part of the executive branch. To execute means to carry out. Then, obviously, the judicial branch would be the judges, the courts, and so forth. Then the legislature is the lawmaking body. Why do I want to see a strong judiciary, but one where the people who are the judges take their oath of office seriously? They're not going to regard the person standing before him or her in terms of how much money he or she has, the political or other power that he or she has, but rather the issue that is being presented to the court. That's why justice is portrayed as a woman with a blindfold and a sword. The sword is to do those things that need to be done to the ones who don't obey the law. And the scales are in the other hand, so that the one holding the scales does not see who is putting evidence in the scale. And the way this scale works out, there's a container on this side, a container on this side, and they both have a chain that brings them up, and they are hooked to what this person is holding. Then evidence is presented by each side. Whichever way the scale tilts is the one who will win. There are different levels of proof that have to be obtained in order for a judgment to be handed down. If it's a crime, because the punishment is the taking away of your liberty by locking you up, taking your life by executing you, taking away some of your property by fining you. Before the state is going to hurt you in that way, the proof has to be at the highest level of beyond a reasonable doubt, not beyond a shadow of a doubt. People say that. There can always be some doubt, meaning a lack of certainty, because if you did not witness what happened, you don't really know what happened. So it's up to the two sides through their attorneys to put evidence in that scale. And the ones who make the judgment are the jurors. You don't know whether they hate the defendant or the race or the religion of the defendant or the ones who are in that religion. You don't know whether they bend over backwards to support a particular religion. So when it comes to a criminal offense, and a person is going to be punished by the power of the state, all 12 of the jurors have to agree. If one disagrees, it results in a hung jury. 11-1 won't get it. It must be 12-0. If that continues to happen, then a prosecutor would just throw up his or her hands and say, we're not going to take this to trial anymore. A judge might even intervene if a prosecutor lets it go on too long and just say, no, this is not going to be engaged in. Then they have what they call a preponderance of the evidence. This is where civil matters are involved, where it's one person against another person, and he or she has a grievance against an individual, or it can be against this, it'd be between the state and another person, but the outcome is not going to be a punishment. It might be where you lose your property because you didn't pay your taxes, and you say you did pay them. So that goes to court. And whichever one can tilt the scales is the one who will win. If the state can show by a preponderance or enough evidence to tilt the scale on its side, you lose, and you got to pay that tax bill, or they can foreclose on your property, take what they're owed, and then you get the rest. Then there is the situation, well, I've gone into that. I don't need to keep going into it, but a point I was trying to make is that the judiciary is extremely important. The law that a legislature enacts may not be interpreted the way they did by a court. You know what the Supreme Court, through a guy named John Marshall a long time ago, indicated? The Constitution does not have a meaning in and of itself. The Constitution means what the Supreme Court says that it means. So the Congress does not determine ultimately what your rights are, nor do the words in the Constitution. The judges who have the final word can change what other courts have said the Constitution means. Judges in the past at the U.S. Supreme Court level said that under the Constitution, there is a privacy right that a woman has, and based on that privacy right, she has the right to get an abortion if she chooses. Well, there are meddlesome people who I call being on crotch watch. They're crotch watchers. They want to know what's going on with people's genitals. They're always sniffing around, trying to figure out what one person is doing with another person when they can't take care of their own business. So now the Supreme Court has some people who are backward looking, and they may take away the constitutional protection that a woman now has for an abortion. A court decades ago interpreted the Constitution to protect a woman's right. All you got to do is get 5 judges. There are 9 on the court, 5-4, 5 judges to say that court was wrong. We're going to overturn that decision. And now the Constitution says what we say that it says. Here's what a judge pointed out. This is why people need to study. They need to read. One thing even my worst enemies would say about me, I'm formidable because I read the law, I know the law, I understand the law, and maybe not everybody agrees with my interpretation, but they know that I know in the abstract what the law means. I read and I understand the Constitution because I read judges' opinions, Supreme Court opinions at the state level, determining the final word on what a state law means at the state level, and at the federal level, where the Supreme Court can undo what a state court has done, can undo what a state legislature has done, can undo what Congress thinks that it did by ruling anything that Congress did to be unconstitutional. Here is what you have to look at when you're dealing with a constitution, and it makes it different from a statute. A statute is a law put on the books by the state legislature or the federal government. I'm giving you all a free law lecture. But there's not enough said to let people understand how this government acts as opposed to how it's supposed to under the law. They don't understand how the mechanics of government operate. So they let people on the one hand who are Republicans, on the other hand who are Democrats, say what they want to have people believe to get what it is they want to get. But what are needed are fair-minded, informed judges who believe in the democratic form of government. I'm not going to say that's the best. This is not a democracy, but the term democratic conveys the notion that the people govern. The people don't govern. Congress doesn't govern. The president doesn't govern. The Supreme Court, and that word supreme means there's nothing higher. The president can write an executive order and sign it. The judges can look at it and say that's unconstitutional. It's not worth the paper it's written on. They overrode the president. Congress enacts a law. The Supreme Court says that's what the Congress said, but that's not what the Constitution means. Their law is unconstitutional. Who judges the judges? That is the question. Who watches the watchman? In Nebraska, I look at the conduct of judges, and I've gotten more judges disciplined than any other politician in the history of this state, because I am not intimidated by anybody's badge or title. A man ain't nothing but a man. A hero ain't nothing but a sandwich. If you're doing what you should do based on what the requirements of your office are, you don't have anything to worry about from me. You won't hear anything from me. But if you step outside that line, I look at what your conduct does in terms of hurting people who can't help themselves. The rich can take care of themselves. The ones I'm interested in are the ones Jesus was interested in. The widows, the orphans, those who are poor, those who have no voice. And when they speak, they're not listened to. Those falsely imprisoned, those imprisoned justly because they committed a crime, but the punishment is too severe. There's no proportionality. These are things the public ought to be looking at, but instead they say, what has my party said? What has this organization said? What has this church said? And that's why all of these people at some time or other are angry with me. Catholic Church, the governor, the attorney general, the judges, the court system, because where I think they're wrong is when I'll speak. And there are people who pay attention. Ordinary people may not. There are people who want to pretend they don't pay attention. But in the legislature, they would always ask, what does Ernie think about that? You know why I'm sharing this with you all? It might give you a better way to judge the way things ought to be and not be so disheartened by the way they are because you think that's the only way they can be. It's why you need to be involved in politics, not necessarily running for an office. You need to register. You need to vote. If these white people keep raising the bar, making it more difficult for us to vote, don't you see that your enemy is telling you what your enemy fears? The enemy does not fear you carrying picket signs, walking picket lines. The people who worked at Kellogg's are not boycotting. That's what people do. They're on strike. They're carrying signs. But do you know what? Kellogg doesn't have to do what they want Kellogg to do. You know what's going to make Kellogg come to the table? When their bottom line, when their profits are starting to shrink, you have to understand the dynamics. And dynamic is a word that just means the movement. How do things function? How do they work? What are the principles according to which they operate? Every business is looking at profit. Whatever increases profit is what a business will do. There was a movie called It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. And to make a long story short, these people had gotten a map and they all wanted to go and find where this treasure was hidden. They all wound up coming to the same place and they were digging and they were coming across the treasure. And one guy was saying, I'm not going to pay any taxes when I get this. And this other guy, he looked at him. He said, wait a minute, you have to pay your taxes. He said, well, wait a minute, I'm not going to pay taxes. He would say, well, even businessmen who lie, cheat, and steal, they pay their taxes. So it's a situation where there are some things that business people ought not to do, but they're not concerned with the ought. The word ought has to do with moral obligation. The word shall has to do with what they must do. They shall pay their taxes. And if they don't pay them, then there's going to be a price to pay. And the government is going to get its. So your enemy will notify you of what is the best weapon against that enemy. The thing that that enemy wants to keep you from doing is the thing the enemy fears, because it's the thing that can defeat the enemy. What can defeat politicians are votes. Votes. That's why these racists are trying to make it as difficult for Black people and poor people and brown people to vote as possible. And we play into their hands if all we do is carry a picket sign and walk a picket line and then don't register and don't vote. The politicians don't care about that. If it rains, you're going to have to go inside. When winter comes, you're not going to be out there protesting. They don't even have to look at you. They don't even have to hear you. When the weather's good, like the crocuses come out, the cicadas, the grasshoppers, and the demonstrators. But you just sit back and wait them out. Let them holler as much as they want to. Let them even break a few windows. Occupy a building or two. But that is like ice that will melt before the sun. And when the right weather comes along, they're going to be gone. What do politicians fear? Voting. Black people and even white people who came from the North were lynched. They were tortured. The women were raped. Yeah, white men are good at raping women of all races. And that's what they want to do. And they raped these Black women during slavery. You look at these Black women And you ask yourself, are these vicious white men who own these women like they do this property not going to sexually abuse them and their little girls? They did do that. That was their stock in trade because these black women were their livestock. They were adulterers also because they were married and they were also Christians. When somebody tells you he or she is a Christian, when they tell me they're a Christian, I'm immediately on my guard and I'm suspicious and I watch them like a hawk. That is a shield behind which people conceal all manner of wickedness. Does it seem like I'm not going anywhere today? If you listened, you will have learned something. If you didn't listen, then you're like those people that Jesus talked about. If they will not heed the law and the prophets and Moses, they won't believe though one comes back from the dead. So why waste your time with them? That's why I don't argue with white people. They don't know enough to argue with me. They don't know their own history. And right now, they're against what they call critical race theory. That means teaching about slavery, the exploitation of men, of women, of immigrants. Oh, the Irish, they were treated like dogs. And then some of them got on the police force and mistreated black people. They had a word NINA, N-I-N-A, in a window. No Irish need apply. So in the early days of this country, Irish people who got off the boat were discriminated against. Those boats that they came over were called coffin ships because a lot of people were ill and they died when they were coming across the ocean, but they weren't coming across the ocean against their will as we were. The Middle Passage, that trip across the Atlantic, where we lost our personhood, we lost any language that we had, any religion that we had, any traditions that we had, all taken away. Couldn't even control our own bodies. That's what they did to us. And the carryover is felt today. What they did to my ancestors made me what I am today. I read their history. I continue to read it. While you're praising Thomas Jefferson because he did most of the writing of the Declaration of Independence, white people don't even understand that. They think Thomas Jefferson came up with all these ideas. Read, well, you're not going to do it. So read about Virginia's declaration, which amounted to a Declaration of Independence at the state level. And you see that old Tom borrowed a lot from what was said by the people in Virginia. And a lot of what these people said in this country was stolen from what philosophers in Britain and other parts of Europe had said. Very little that this country has done originated in this country. Americans are good thieves and retailers. They take and resell. They take because they have the kill power from other people. They talk about their private property, but they stole it from the people who were here already. They wanted, because they know how, if you can vice somebody's mind with religion, you can easily control them. So they wanted the native people to accept Sunday. That was how they'd start, because everybody understands that. And you know what the response of those people were who supposedly were savages and needed to be Christianized? They said, we have no need to make one day holy because the spirit, whatever the term was that different tribes would use, controls every day. So every day belongs to that one. So there's no single day set aside. There are things that these arrogant white people could learn if they would open their minds. Since they don't know their own history, why should I argue with them? I always, so that they will understand, tell them, you will not find Einstein discussing differential equations with somebody who doesn't understand how to do short division. Wouldn't he look like a fool He would be as crazy as he looked with his hair going every which way. But Einstein had a sense of humor, and he also was unlucky in love. But you all don't read enough to see these people as human beings and know that they had problems. Do you know this man once talked about removing the stamp from a letter that this woman he lost had written him, because when he put his tongue on that stamp, it was the same place his lady love had put her tongue, so that connection existed. This is all in his mind. He was like every other person, one thing out here and something else in here, and he was looking for something. There are people always looking and never finding, and some people find, but they are so inattentive and unsophisticated, they don't realize that they found it, that they have it, and they lose it without ever knowing that they possessed it. These are the things philosophers talk about, and it sounds so strange, but there's a kind of logic to it. Even though you don't understand it all, you want to put them on a pedestal and say they're the smartest people in the world. You've got a brain. You can nurture that brain. Feed your brain, feed your mind, and do it by reading. Reading puts you in touch with some of the best minds that ever were in bodies that walk this planet. Read, read, read. Now, I think what I'm going to do is read something that will shock some of you all. This is a letter from John M. Gerard, judge of the Nebraska Supreme Court. He was not the Chief Justice, but this is a letter that he wrote to me October 13th, 2004. And he never changed his opinion. And he now is a member of the federal court. Senator, naturally addressed to Ernie Chambers, thank you for visiting with me yesterday. It was an unexpected nugget in my day. Your comment, quote, "You may be preaching to the choir, but it is good to hear/know someone is listening once in a while," unquote. That comment was right on point. We all need that. Neither of us are in popular jobs, and we did not seek that, but it is nice to know someone will listen to a well-reasoned argument or position, even if they may not agree with the position. That is what I truly appreciate about you, and hopefully the respect is mutual, and it was. In reviewing the legislative history of numerous statutes, I always talked about making a history. I'm saying this for the record. Listen to the judge who would be ruling on the nature of what we did. In reviewing the legislative history of numerous statutes, I read and examine virtually all of your comments in committee and on the floor of the legislature. I must say that I agree with you on the merits of legislation about 85 to 90% of the time, but I understand your rationale and reasoning 100% of the time. See, that's a man who can think. Even though he winds up with a different conclusion from mine, he can see the logic according to which I'm proceeding and grasp it. He just reaches a different conclusion. Going back to the letter, hopefully individuals who read my judicial opinions understand my rationale and reasoning nearly 100% of the time, even if they may disagree with the result in a particular case. As we discussed yesterday, if someone will truly listen to you and understand the basis of your reasoning, one of two things will happen. Either A, they will become better educated and adopt your well-reasoned position, or B, they will point out the fallacy of your reasoning and you will become better educated on an issue. Either of those outcomes is highly preferable to ignorance or stubborn adherence to an indefensible position. I have always said on the floor of the legislature, talk back to me. I don't know everything, You may know something that I don't. If you don't say it, then my position is going to prevail. I don't want it to prevail just because I take it. I want it to prevail because it's right. And if you do persuade me that my position is wrong, I will change my position because I see no benefit or advantage to holding a position that I know is wrong. And I tell them, I will thank you for having improved my education. And if somebody comes up arrogant and will say, Senator Chambers, I'm going to improve your education. And I listen to him for a while. I say, okay, okay, and perhaps I will improve yours. But that's where you begin to deal with words. And I'm right at home dealing with words. The judge says, thus, I enjoyed talking with you. You were also preaching to the choir. You are a principled man. This is a judge. You are a principled man and truly a decent human being. That is the highest compliment I can pay to a man who has fought legally and always above board to improve the plight of everyday Nebraskans of every stripe and creed. This is a man who knew what I did. He didn't go by the negative editorials or the foolishness of these ignorant senators. I mean, ignorant in the sense of lacking knowledge or being lackeys of one political party or the other. I don't wear anybody's badge. I don't wear anybody's uniform. I use my mind. That's what I have to live by. That's what I have to guide me. And when the lights go out and it's dark, everybody's gone, I have myself to live with, and I know myself. And I want to have done what I believe I should have done to the best of my ability. And I cannot sit here and tell you that's what I always have done. Yet there are times I've slacked, but when I'm slacking off, I'm far ahead of everybody else. And that's not an idle boast. But there's one that I cannot fool. There's one I cannot ace around, one I cannot trick, because that one is within me. That one knows me like no person. People know of me, but they don't know me. And I know more about them than they'll ever know about me because I watch them. You know what philosophers say? You understand an object through its operations. How does it function? What does it do? I wrote a rhyme. I write rhymes about everything. There was a fool who heard this statement about not reinventing the wheel. Well, first of all, you can't reinvent something. Once it's invented, it's there. You might can improve on it, but the invention lets you know that this is something that came into being and did not exist before I did this. But they use that expression, reinventing the wheel, meaning you're going to give a whole lot of time on something that has already been done. So just go find out what that is doing, how it's operating, and then apply it. You don't have to try to come up with the whole thing on your own because first of all, you're not going to do it because you don't even understand how this that exists operates. But there was one idiot and he decided he was going to reinvent the wheel. But when he got through what he came up with, since the wheel is round and he wanted to get something else, he came up with the square. So the problem was that his reinvention of the wheel would not roll. It would not serve the function of a wheel. He came up with something, but it has to be called something other than a wheel because it didn't operate and function according to the way the wheel should. When we, as people, as human beings, forget nationality, forget sexual orientation, forget religion, these are just things that people put on and take off on whim, and try to get to the bedrock of what makes a human being. Maybe we'll never get to the final answer, but the discussion will be entirely different. Nothing is going to be determined completely because you're a Democrat or you're a Republican. I don't take any party label. I don't belong to any organization. I don't work for anybody. Nobody bosses me. Now, I'm intelligent. If somebody puts a gun up to me and say, Chambers, if you say one more word, I'll blow your brains out. Zippered, silent night. But then, as the song says, and I don't say it to that fool because he's got the gun and he's got the drop on me, my day will come. And that's what I look at. I've been asked, and as things get more and more partisan, am I going to come back to the legislature? By people who were very ecstatic when I left the legislature. The only way I would go back to the legislature or even consider it, first of all, I have to live. Because if I'm dead, maybe I'm smarter than people while I'm dead than they were while they're alive, but I can't act on it. First of all, I have to be alive. Secondly, my mind has to be clear by my standards, and my health has to be good. Here's what I tell people, and I'm gonna make it clear in the beginning. I'm jesting, I'm joking. Not about what I wanted to do. I wish I could meet that 115-year-old woman. I would like to meet her, and I wouldn't shake her hand because she may not do that, and I don't encourage people to shake hands anyway. I won't shake anybody's hand, and that was before the pandemic. Down in Lincoln, I saw that people who use the bathroom don't wash their hands, so I don't shake people's hands. But I would tell her that it's inspirational to me at my advanced age to find somebody who has lived the equivalent of a generation longer than I have. And I can't say it's by your will, through your intelligence, but whatever it was, you survived all of those years and you're here in your right mind. So I applaud you and I'm glad to meet you. You're a standard for me. You're a role model. I don't have to croak because other people have croaked at a certain age. So I'm doing what I can to maintain my health. I got both of my vaccinations. Mine were from Moderna. And when Moderna is determined to be of a mind that a booster shot is necessary, when it's available, I'm going to get it. We as Black people are so ignorant. Once again, your enemy can tell you what's in your best interest. White people are getting vaccinated, not at the rate they should. You know what zip code has the highest level of unvaccinated people? 111. Matthew Stelly called it 111, 68111, where the bulk of us live. There are people in Africa who are trying to get a vaccine. There's a white South African actress, Charlize Theron, who is working to try to get vaccines to Africa for the benefit of Black people. If our enemy is doing everything to discourage us from being vaccinated, you're going to do what your enemy is telling you to do because on this your enemy is working in your best interest, then why will I listen to my enemy? If, first of all, not every white person is my enemy. Not all of any group is my enemy. Not every Black person is my friend. Now, we have a lot of things in common, but I've been betrayed by more Black people than white people because I won't give a white person the opportunity to betray me. They will try to do it, and they have undercut what I do, and they have snuck up behind me to do things, but they can't betray me because I don't trust them in the first place. There are Black people I trusted, and they were the ones who could betray me. So I watch everybody. But at any rate, Black people are not getting vaccinated. We get COVID, we die from it. Last week, I read an article because it dealt with the national issue of Black morticians dying from COVID. Jesus talked about the dead burying the dead. And people say, what does that mean? It can mean anything you want it to mean, because if you take it literally, it doesn't make sense. If somebody's dead, they don't get up out of the ground and come over here and dig a hole and put somebody else in the ground and cover them up. Words are used metaphorically as metaphors. Something is like something else. It's not that, but if you understand that, then you apply it to what I'm talking about. You understand this. That's why Jesus said the planter went out to plant, and he used what people knew about agriculture to teach them something about the attitude of people and the way they accepted his teaching. But at any rate, this is literally almost the dead burying the dead. Morticians deal in death, and they see the dead people coming, and the dead people are there because of COVID. Cyrus, the virus, took them. And the mortician himself doesn't get vaccinated. And Cyrus comes to get him through the dead that he is making his living from. But that from which he's making his living is going to be the death of him. You can say this: if the morticians don't believe that COVID is real, then the mortician is going to die, and the dead will kill the living, or the dead will kill the dead and bury the dead. We need to get vaccinated. I know that there are some of us who believe that crazy stuff. You can take this medicine that they give to horses and it kills worms, and then it'll kill worms in you, and it'll kill you too, because you take the same dosage that is given to a 2,000-pound horse. And we run around here listening to these white people saying, well, I think if I get vaccinated, it's going to do this or that. Well, don't get vaccinated and get COVID. Then you're going to have tubes coming in and out of you. But since you're black, like me, you're not going to get the treatment in a hospital that white people get. You don't get that now. You think they're going to put you in a hospital bed when that bed is needed by somebody white? And it's going to be a white ignoramus who wouldn't get the shot. And going to have tubes coming in the nose and mouth, trying to force oxygen into them because their lungs can no longer do what lungs do. Lungs are a breathing mechanism. That's where oxygen that you take in goes into your blood. It doesn't do any good to get oxygen into your lungs if it cannot get from your lungs into your bloodstream. And it needs to nourish all the organs in your body. If you would get a 9th grade science book, you would learn something about the way your body works, the way the various organs work. If you knew the number of organs you have, how delicately balanced they are, how they all rely on each other and work in sync to make it possible for you to take a breath, and that oxygen gets to your brain. Your brain needs oxygen so that you can talk, so that you can walk, so that you can see. So when you open your eyes in the morning, you know who you are, you know where you are, you know what you want to do. And it even puts you in a position to nurture your mind so that if things have been such a burden on you and you are depressed and you don't feel like getting out of bed because you can't face the day, if you harness those powers that you have within you, you will not be defeated by defeatist thoughts, by worry about what's going to happen, and it hasn't even happened yet. And at the end of the day, you'll see that it didn't happen. These things are what we need to understand. But the first thing we have to do is keep ourselves alive. Keep ourselves alive and healthy for those who care about us. And you think that as an old man, I forgot, don't you, about me and the 115-year-old woman? I didn't forget. I take the long way around. I would say, ma'am, I'm not going to shake your hand, but I'm doing all that I can to get where you are. I try to eat the things that I need to give me the nutrition that I need. I don't have any bad habits, don't smoke, drink, None of that. I say, and I'm trying to maintain my health. And I say, for example, and I drop down and I do 25 push-ups. She said, move over, Sonny. And she drops down and does 35. That is not likely to happen, but it might. So I believe that we may be a people responsible for our own demise. We will not drink from the fountain of life. We will not look at the fact that these vaccines were made for our enemy to help keep our enemy alive, not to kill the enemy. Some people have a bad reaction to it because they have a bad reaction from the sun, from ordinary things that are in nature. Talking about in the main and on the whole, if our enemy is producing these vaccines to defeat Cyrus the virus, we should be first in line. But we're not, because we are ignorant. I don't mean we don't know the alphabet. I don't mean we're ignorant in the sense of not being able to read. We're ignorant in the sense of not understanding. In the biblical verse, I say my people perish for lack of knowledge, but the verse actually is my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, and we will destroy ourselves. Then another prophet said, oh, that my head were waters, plural, and my eyes a fountain of tears, that I might weep day and night for my people. And then there's another one. Jesus's disciples came to him upset because these people wouldn't go the way the disciples told them they should go. And Jesus told them, when you reach out and you come across a certain type of person, leave them alone, for they are blind. And when the blind lead the blind, they'll both fall into the ditch. That's what Jesus said. Some people you have to leave alone. You try to do what you can. When you've done the best you can, you have to go plow a different field. We have Black people who are saying that you shouldn't get vaccinated. You don't need to be vaccinated. But what the governor has done is to say that healthcare is going to be rationed for people so that there'll be beds available for some of these idiotic people who won't get vaccinated and will need to be hooked up to a machine. And that ventilation brings in air. They got to try to push enough oxygen into your body so some of it will be forced in your bloodstream because your lungs cannot take the air in, the oxygen, and then it cannot process it. So a machine needs to do what you already have the equipment to do if you use your brain. Why were you given a brain? To use, think. And what I tell the senators, when they did not read the bills, you've got a thick skull, and don't let people make you embarrassed about that. Now, gold is in Fort Knox. Do you think that the walls that protect Fort Knox are made out of paper mache? Thick walls to guard a precious treasure. I want my brain, my head to be as hard as steel, not just stone, because there's a precious treasure inside, and I want that treasure to be protected. But I tell my colleagues, I don't know why in the world nature gave you such a thick wall to guide so poor a treasure, because there's nothing in there. It'd be like building a Fort Knox to protect a penny. That's the way I talk to them. Yeah, I'm talking down to them. I'm not trying to humiliate them just so they feel bad. I'm trying to stir up something in them so they will show me a thing or two, that they have got a brain, that they can think. But when they begin to think, then they're going to come where I am, because I've thought about it. I've used my brain. I've used logic. I understand the law. I understand the Constitution. And I'm not a fortune teller to predict what's going to happen in the future, but I've got sense enough to know how to prepare to make it happen if preparation will make it happen. They don't even know how to prepare it. If somebody is a chef and you put flour, water, shortening, eggs, flavoring, all these things, everything that's needed to make a cake, a chef is going to put that all together and come up with a cake. Give it to somebody who doesn't know anything about it, and they come up with a mess. And that's what happened a lot of times in the legislature that I would have to straighten out. I had to spend so much time fighting to stop bad bills. And people would ask, Ernie, why do you do that? That's not your responsibility. I say, oh, but it is. Well, they're the ones who'll be blamed for it. I tell them, I'm not interested in blame now. I look at the impact that these bad laws are going to have on people out there who don't even know that these bad things are in store for them. And when we stand up here in this legislature and I question you and you don't know the answers to what's in your own bill, how do you expect the ordinary citizen out there to know? And that's why courts, if a bill is enacted into law by the legislature and a person of ordinary intelligence can read it and not know whether A is right or B is right, or sometimes A is and sometimes B is and sometimes neither is, that law is too vague. It is indefinite. It does not give guidance. And since the state can use its power to punish somebody who violates the law that does not give notice as to what it means will be struck down by the court. It's unconstitutional. It's too vague. It's indefinite. It can mean one thing over here or something else over there, the same words. That is not going to happen. We need to read. We need to understand. We need to register. We need to vote. Why do you think Jason, the black senator, was down there doing, not Jason, I always say Jason. You all know who I'm trying to say. Now, see, you don't know whether I forgot his name or not, do you? I could be playing you, but what difference does it make? We know who I'm talking about, the black young man with the thick beard who stopped those people from splitting Douglas County. He said, he didn't say these words, but this is what his conduct was like. I am the seashore. The ocean can roar out there. It can sink ships. But when you come here, you'll come this far and no farther, because I'm here to stop you. And that's what the seashore does. And that's what was done during the legislative session. But he had to stand and let them know that he was not a man to be played with. He wasn't anybody's toy. And if you stand up to these people and let them know there'll be a price to pay, you can get some things done. Now, I've talked longer than I intended to. And as I always sign off, like the canary did when somebody told him the door to his cage was open, he said, I'm out of here.
Thank you for watching The Ernie Chambers Show. If you'd like to make suggestions, email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This has been an EWC Communication production.